Chapter 11. A sullen-faced Mexican in a big hat guarded the rim of barren rock house valley when they neared it a few minutes later. Lounging beside a large rock, he looked not unlike a peaceful shepherd stranded here in a lonely waste. But Pat was not deceived. A business-like carbine slanted across the man's arm proclaimed his purpose. He waved Toller on, favoring the others with a steady look. A sweeping glance about showed Pat at least one other guard, posted some rods away at a strategic point. Toller led the way down into a faint path, his horse picking its careful course amongst the rocks. Having reached the floor of the valley, they wound in and out among granite monuments and hauled up at last on the edge of a relatively open space about a half an acre in extent. Pat and Clay and the girl paused there for a moment, while Toller abruptly gave a piercing whistle. Heavy silence ensued, till a rattle of stone drew their eyes toward the ragged mouth of a cave slanting into the withered rocks. Lithe and slim, with dark pants stuffed into his cowboy boots, a shapeless black hat cocked on his head, Bill Bonney sauntered into the opening, glancing their way almost indifferently, casual and emotionless as always. Nothing at all was said till he had come quite close. Pat and Clay dismounted to face him, Esther remaining in her saddle. Bonnie appeared only half aware of her presence, cocking a pale eye in her direction absently.
"Well, you came, Marble,"
He spoke to Clay, dropping the words.
"I thought you'd be sensible."
Pat sensed instinctively the explosive nature of the situation, so casual on the surface. A ruthless killing machine never known to show the conjunction of his most ruthless acts, provided they fit into his own particular code of conduct. Billy the Kid yet had the reputation for inquiring into the matter of motives with some care. There was that much in their favor, a slender hope at best.
"Well, I'm here,"
Clay muttered.
"Maybe you wouldn't mind mentioning the reason for your invite?"
Bull Toller led his horse out into the open and dropped the reins to seat himself on a rock beyond earshot, but close enough to keep a steady watch on all that went on. That move, made without any sign from Bonnie, told Pat all he needed to know about the outlaw's rigid control over his fellows. Bonnie's nod was curt. His glance still fastened on Clay's expressionless face.
"I see you brought your protection along, too."
His tone was delicately ironic. Clay flushed a dull red.
"She insisted on coming and then followed us, Bonnie," he rapped. "You mind your talk if you want to get anywhere with me."
His sharpness betrayed the tension he was under. The kid only grunted a cheerful acceptance of the reprimand.
"And I suppose Stephen insisted on coming as well?"
"I came out of curiosity, Bill." Pat smiled thinly. "The same itch, I suspect, of being under your hide. Or have I got you wrong?" Their glances crossed. Some identical quality in these two recognized a flash of iron control in each other, and discreetly withdrew. Bonnie made no mention of his warning, uttered the night before.
"Marble, I want the answer to a plain question."
The outlaw's indolence fell away from him in a twinkling. His words came sharp and quick.
"Who downed Bill Block? It ain't curiosity. I must know."
Clay stared at him. "It wasn't me," he muttered finally, his breathing audible. "Does that answer you?" Pat read the range detective's inward surprise, his quick effort to probe the meaning of the direction taken by this attack. Nor did the swift brush of death pass Clay by without its shock. Whatever his reading, Bill Bonney was not sparring. He wanted an answer.
You was there. I wasn't. Who did it?
The outlaw rasped. It boils down, Pat thrust in with cold practicality, to what Block was up to, and who had the chance to get at him. It did not escape him that Bonnie was careless of the implication that a connection existed between himself and the plumb bob ramrod. Would you know more about that than we could? Bonnie scrutinized him with care. The straw-colored brows and the buck teeth lifted his upper lip slightly gave him an inhumane look, as if the cold face was an utter stranger to the display of any feeling within.
In what way?
He murmured. Bill, Pat told him, glancing levelly, I want it straight. Was your crowd all with you when you pulled out of Castle Gate last night? The kid's glance strayed towards Bill Toller, sitting there on his rock, waiting. He did not reply directly, though his brief hesitation was perhaps an answer in itself.
And how would that bear on things?
He retorted then sharply. Might, Pat insisted firmly. One more thing, Bonnie. Who did you turn that 7-hook beef over to? Was it Bill Block?
Billy the Kid bared his teeth in a mirthless grin. Ain't hiding much from you, am I?
He appeared to find a new interest in Pat.
Stevens, you were standing in that library door when I pulled out of town with the boys. Maybe you saw something?
Pat's headshake was just perceivable. I was still standing there, Bill, when that shotgun let go. Marble was down at the hotel getting his face patched up. Miss Kane will tell you that. We didn't even know where Block was or who got the charge, for that matter.
Well, I don't know.
The outlaw was plainly dubious.
There's that business of Ace Belson.
A glitter flickered into the pale eyes, and the small mouth hardened.
You laid a sentence on 2 of my friends, Marble, and then shot one of them.
Bonnie seemed ready to take lightning action, his slim hands hungrily fluttering. They had been waiting for this to come. Clay put on a look of heated disgust. He tore off his hat and thrust a finger through the ragged perforation in the back, bearing mute witness to the fact that the slug which had made it must have come from behind. The inference was unmistakable, and Bonnie got it.
Ace was right careless,
he grinned, yet his expression said that he was less amused than angered.
Or was it Bull?
Clay's lips tightened as the trap concealed in the casual query.
We'll say it was Ace, he snapped, and that he made his last mistake. His manner hardened. You didn't answer Pat questions, Bill. Are you gonna?
Bonnie's colorless eyes were snake-like. He didn't like being pushed.
What's that?
The words rustled.
Stevens asked if you turned that 7-hook stuff over to my father.
Bonnie studied this briefly. It was not what Pat had asked at all, but he let it go.
We'll let him answer that,
he said. Turning quickly towards the cave, he raised his voice.
Rudy, step out here and bring your company.
Startled, they looked that way, and after a pause they caught the faint scuff of boots, and Doc Marble appeared in the mouth of the cave. Hatless, disheveled, his hands fastened behind his back, the big rancher was in the custody of one of the Kid's slouching confederates, his stature dwarfing the other. Esther Moon had remained until now in breathless silence, waiting tensely, her eyes clamped on Bill Bonnie's face in fascination, but at this her breath sucked inaudibly.
"Clay!"
she gasped.
"It's he! They've taken him prisoner."
Clay looked towards his father, as if turned to stone.
"What's the meaning of this, Bonnie?"
he ground out slowly. The outlaw's smooth mask did not slip in the slightest.
"It means that he's right handy to answer questions."
He raised his voice just enough to carry.
"Marble, Did I turn the 7-hook herd over to you? He awaited the answer with a humorous ease. Old Doc snorted deep in his throat.
You've already overreached yourself, Bonnie, he rumbled angrily. But you'd know a damn sight better than to try that.
Clay seemed honestly stunned by this violent denial. Pat read the outlaw leader's shrewd object in producing his captive so dramatically, and slowly the pieces of this puzzle seemed to fall into place.
Bonnie,
He spoke up jarringly. Do you still hold an interest in those 7-hook steers by any chance? The kid's brows lifted in surprise that were mocking. You're slipping, Stevens, he murmured. Why else do you suppose we're going through all this red tape? Pat nodded. He understood. It rang true to what he had heard of the outlaw, who at times could drive to his objection with a smashing directness. It was plain enough now that something had gone wrong with the arrangements of the handling of the rustled 7-hook herd. And with uncommon patience, Bonnie was unraveling the tangled strands till he could come to the truth. It ain't clear to me, the cool long rider pinned Doc with his glance, what your grudge against Block would be. I keep asking, and all I get is a howl. Old Doc promptly obliged with an aroused bellow.
Damn you, I had nothing against Bill Block, he roared. Can't you get that through your thick head?
Chop that talk off, Marble. Bonnie went steely with menace. The next instant was shaking his head doufully. You go on telling me a plumb bob man could get knocked off there in Castlegate without your knowing? He marveled with thin satire. Your own right bower at that. Pat gathered his meaning accurately enough. The kid had never hesitated about killing a man whom he regarded as an enemy in coldest blood. He scented an enemy now, in Marble, or in someone else close to him, but he had to be sure. One thing was certain. The double cross he had suffered would never stick, if enough pressure sufficed to force it into the light.
Kid,
Pat threw at the outlaw harshly. You seem to suspect Marble there for playing a treacherous game. Well, I say that you're wrong. Bonnie was almost petulant. I ain't sold on it myself, he growled, as if in patience with his own doubts. But I do know I ain't losing. What you got to offer, Stevens? Well, between them, Block and Ed Gurley transacted the bulk of Plum Bob's business, Pat answered. You seem satisfied enough about Block. Have you looked that bookkeeper over? Real careful, I mean. For an instant, Bonnie delayed. Then he brushed the suggestion aside. That pen pusher? You ought to know a rubber stamp when you see it, he scoffed, smiling. All right. I'm pointing out the gaps that you're leaving, though, retorted Pat. You seem to be trying to get out of Marble things that he don't even know. What did Toller report on his conference with Gurley last night? He asked with cold significance. Bonnie stiffened. His lips drew back. Wolf-wise, his unrested eyes seemed aware of everything about him, and then he relaxed. Why, that Marble hadn't made no provisions for paying me, he snapped, quickly, boldly. That's when I decided to pick Marble up and hold him.
That's a lie, Bonnie,
Old Doc roared hotly. If Block or Ed Gurley had any dealing with you, it wasn't my doing. Pat was quick to grasp the opening, shaking his head regretfully. I'd check that if I was you, Bill, if you hadn't already, Pat said softly. The kid glared at Bull Toller's direction, struck by a thought inevitably not new to him. Some confidence, as he was wont to place in any man, was of a fleeting kind. He caught himself then. Thanks. I'll run out a few other strings first. he returned dryly, but his suspicion was aroused. Clay appeared about on that point of exploding. You mean you're holding Dad here? He demanded. Well, let's just say somewheres. Bonnie grinned, once more his old cool self, though there was an ever-present danger in his brusque movements. That is till you're ready to turn that 7-hook bunch back to me, he amended casually. I'll take it all now, Marble, to make up for the bother and expense. Clay's face was an index of his reaction to this defiant ultimatum. He suddenly looked older. Again and again he had stated his firm decision to claim the 7-hook herd for its owners, and to do so earlier today would have spelled grievous and almost irreparable injury for Esther's father. Now it was his own parent whose safety was at stake. It was a terrible position for him, and Esther revealed her comprehension of his dilemma by moving closer to him with a look of compassion. Bonnie, Clay grated, his face the color of old ash, I'm trying to look hard at this your way. You're making a big mistake, and it may be too late before you find it out. If anything happens to Dad, he choked. Yeah, I know. The kid gave him a fish-cold stare, impervious to anything remotely resembling pity. You'll have to arrest me for rustling, I expect. There was a chill in his drawl which said they could get no further with each other on these grounds. You pass yourself off as a range bull, the outlaw continued. I gave you your chance to name Bill Block's killer, Marble. You better dig him out in a hurry, too, before I turn up with my own choice. Clay opened his lips, just swelling. You heard him, old Doc roared at his son unexpectedly. Don't you argue, you hear me, Clay? Clay looked at his father and then away. There was a clear warning in the rancher's tone that not even he could miss. Doc was telling him to risk no more controversy with this cold-blooded owl hoot for whatever reason. Bonnie's mirthless smirk advised that he'd understood the byplay. When can we expect them steers, Clay? He inquired with brazen confidence. You'll understand we don't like hanging around, and we may have to leave kind of sudden. Clay did not even bother to answer. He turned away, his face bleak and hopeless. Let's get out of here, he muttered thinly. Pat sensed his bitter distress. All Clay's animosity towards old Doc was forgotten, swept away as if it had never been in this hour of crisis. Yet it helped none at all. They could do nothing more here. Under the kid's regard, they mounted and turned to leave. Go back the way you come, he threw after them, with his characteristic brisk tone of authority. And just remember, I've dealt square with you, Marble. Now it's your move. Heavy silence attended the three on their way out of the rock house valley. Not till they had passed the sentry above and the lowly hills lay empty before them did anyone speak. What will you do, Clay? Esther said at last, gazing on him with eyes of pity. There's no choice, of course. You must turn those steers over to Bill Bonnie as he says. I don't know. For once, Clay appeared all but oblivious to her presence. What can a man do? I got myself into this, he burst out breathingly. I don't intend to let your dad off, and now... But there's no comparison, Esther exclaimed warmly. It's a question now of Mr. Marble's life. I suppose we leave it till we get back to the ranch, Pat put in. I can't persuade myself that Doc's in any immediate danger. Bonnie thinks your dad caught Bill Block in a crooked play and had him knocked off. I gave him something to think about in that direction, and maybe now the kid will act on his own. He seems sharp enough. They talked it over without much hope of solution, threading their way down into Axehead Canyon through the dreamy, fly-buzzing afternoon. Press Moon met them at the edge of a bench below his ranch. "Y'all got back all right and brought Esther, too," he said in a relieved tone. Pat nodded. "And now we'll have our look at that 7-hook stuff, Moon," he said matter of fact. Swift regret mounted in Press's weathered features. "I was afraid you'd say that. It just ain't possible, Stevens." "Not possible? What do you mean?" Pat's tone quickened. "What's going on here anyway? Where's Sam and Ezra?" "Well, that's just it," Moon returned. "Your friends were afraid Bonnie was making a play to grab the herd, sending that note to take Marble away. As soon as you left, they pulled out to drift the 7-hook bunch back into the canyon, Stevens, where it can't be found. I don't even know where it went." End of chapter 11.